Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and a warm welcome to our new episode of Visite. Today I want to deal with a question that a young woman wrote to me. She keeps having vaginal itching. And of course, this is likely to be a fungal vaginal infection. And I want to tell you that Candida burdens far more people these days than you realise. In this case you perceive it, and yet it is the case that Candida also lives as physiological germs in us. People have Candida in their intestines too. The question is always, with what level of activity does Candida take over? The control. Candida is actually kept fairly well balanced in the gut. 80% of our microflora make up Bifidius lactobacilli. These are lactic acid producing bacteria that guarantee a very high immune performance, that produce hydrogen peroxide, and thus, of course, also keep the intestines away from many other germs or pathogenic germs. It's always about balance. What microflora do we need? And which microflora can get the upper hand immediately? When the intestinal, so the environment in the intestine, changes noticeably. And especially the skin and mucous membrane health in us humans is something incredibly important, because these are the first contact areas with which our body comes into contact with the outside world. The condition of the mucous membranes of the eyes, nasal mucous membranes, including the esophagus, stomach, intestines, down to the intestines and the vagina, is of course also a target for germs at the moment. And it's a miracle that the body keeps a pH environment in this range in a regulating and building up manner, that no sub-infections can take place here. Therefore, the development to Candida, if it comes to a strong mycosis, is hardly anything that happens from outside. Candida loves sugar. So whenever you are someone who has a high need for sugar and sugary drinks, and also sweet fruit, carbohydrates in any form, you are actually risking that Candida can develop above the normal level. Those are yeasts, and millions of new cultures then grow. The other thing is, and many viewers will certainly observe that too, if you take an antibiotic, anti means against and bios means life. That means that any antibiotic never has a specific effect, but if it is in the human system, in the organism, then it also takes away a lot of healthy microflora. And then there is an imbalance, and Candida gets the dominance in its development gain. It is especially so with these vaginal inflammations or vaginal itching. So Candida itself isn't just, of course, to be treated with antifungal medication, but above all the knowledge to pull away the nutrient medium here, to build up a healthy breeding ground. That means in the area of flora, the vagina must now be treated with a lot of right-spinning lactic acid. That's everything that's fermented. That's the Vagisan suppositories. There are a lot of other manufacturers on the market. But get advice from the pharmacy that you first rebuild the mucous membrane of the vagina properly. Candida can't develop on a healthy mucous membrane. And with that you will restore a normal, healthy microflora. The other thing is that, of course, for this intense itching, the pharmacy also offers antifungal creams that can be used temporarily. I myself worked with the Sanum company and I use Albicansan. Albicansan is available as a cream and it is also available as tablets, and Albicansan is taken once or twice a day, or 5 droplets once or twice. And this Albicansan cream is applied there. Candida is also still a big issue if you are contaminated with toxins, because Candida loves heavy metals. And Candida is often the one which leads us to a toxic heavy metal load. That's why my wish is always to know whether Candida comes into contact with these heavy metals, and that Candida isn't only treated ostensibly, but rather we focus on a restoration of the milieu. Another good clue besides the lactobacilli, which of course produce sufficient right-spinning lactic acid, hydrogen peroxide, which has an antibacterial, antiviral, antifungal effect, also stimulates the immune system. These right-spinning lactic acid bacteria are unique because they stimulate neutrophils, for example macrophage, and the alpha and beta interferon, interleukin and tumour necrosis factor, to name just a few. This may not be so relevant to you now, but these are incredibly valuable immune reactions that no longer provide any breeding ground for Candida because of the mucosal stability. There is also the Bacillus subtilis. Bacillus subtilis is also a germ, a bacterium that lives in us. And this little Bacillus subtilis has incredibly powerful immunogenic properties. This Bacillus subtilis is available from Sanum company as Bacillus subtilis D6. And it is has a higher immune stimulating effect than only the lactic acid bacteria. I use it for all autoimmune diseases and allergies. It has an antifungal, antiparasitic, antibacterial and antiviral effect, and also produces digestive enzymes. So these are all things that I think are very important, to look for a good remedy that contains many strains of probiotics. And now I don't just mean the lactobacilli and the bifidobacteria, but also Escherichia coli, or for example Enterococcus. These are all high quality immune germs, and to name just a few, there is the Pro-Symboflor, Symbioflor 1, Symbioflor 2, what you take in a certain order, as drops once or twice a day. On the other hand, that would, of course, also be a good and high quality preparation, which may also include the common strains. So the broader a probiotic is structured, the better. And if you only have lactobacilli and bifidobacteria, then you should look that maybe Colibiogen with Escherichia coli can complement it, or Enterococcus, which, by the way, is made up of human stool germs, but has an incredibly good effect, especially in connection with candidiasis. I think that will help you get better. And always remember, one of the highest quality vitamins for the mucous membrane is vitamin A. You can determine vitamin A, but you can also take vitamin A. And vitamin A, as you all know, is abundant in carrots, for example, or in yellow and orange vegetables. These are still recommendations that I would give you for this. So you shouldn't believe that you have to treat vaginal candida simply through antimycotics only with cream. You have to look further. You may want to have a stool sample analysis to check your bowels and to see if your microflora is in a good balance. In these stool samples, I almost always see that this flora of lactic acid bacteria, lactobacilli, enterococcus, is almost always too low. We don't actually live in the cultures where we consume fermented vegetables or fermented yogurt or kefir. And all these things every day, but we would do well to do it. And for example, organic apple cider vinegar would form a very good basis. I hope this has given you some advice, and I would then move to the next request, which is a patient with a basalioma. And a basalioma is assessed by academic medicine as a so-called white skin cancer. It is the preliminary stage, or it can develop into melanoma. And she wanted to take up the question again. She received the advice, whatever happens, stay away from the sun, because the sun would have a significant influence on the development of skin tumours. I am just as familiar with my studies, and I also know that in the first few years we used to bring these things into the context that sun, and especially intense sun exposure, causes skin cancer. And if you have the exposure really too long on your skin and you get sunburned, then of course this sunburn is very uncomfortable for everyone. And that's not how I want to be understood now. I believe whoever gets sunburned will be much more careful in the future and will hardly allow that anymore. But a sun as the cause that actually guarantees our life, because without the sun there is no vitamin D. And I think by now everyone realises how important it is for us to take care of our individual vitamin D level. It is incredibly important because the conversion of vitamin C, the inactive 25-0H to the active 1.2, means to slow down tumour growth. The vitamin D situation has indeed changed in our latitudes and developed into a real problem. And there are studies, I remember a study in America in 2000, where significantly 30% fewer women would develop breast cancer if vitamin D were in us at an optimal level. That means a lot of diseases like fibromyalgia or rickets, bone decalcification, osteoporosis, osteomalacia, the ability to think, and many other processes depend on vitamin D. Also, vitamin D dependent for providing enough growth hormone is testosterone. It increases brain performance and ensures mental balance. But that's not why I would say that, and I want to come back to the fact that actually for 20 years, the thoughts that the sun causes a basilioma or a melanoma haven't been medically connected at all anymore. Just as it is ruled out that the ozone hole is a cause of increasing melanoma. Why I am allowed to say this is the fact that there is enough scientific work over the past 20 years for it now. And we just saw that when people also live in regions who have a high exposure to the sun, that they are not necessarily prone to increased melanoma development. So, healthy diet, which we show today, when we eat a lot of fresh food, when we also consume unhealthy fats. Well, fresh food is something positive, high quality nutrition, but if we have a lot of unsaturated or trans fats, for example, if oil is used over and over again and repeatedly oxidized in the deep fryer, when we eat margarine, you can't make a solid fat from a plant. Unfortunately, this is only possible with the help of chemistry. When all these things happen to us, all we do, and we do this harm to the body, there is a very causal connection with the fatty acids. Then the tendency is individually linked to skin cancer, but not from the UV light. The sun is so important because the sun moves all of these processes positive towards life. Over the years, studies around the world have shown where the skin cancer centres are actually located. And I keep looking at a sheet of paper here because I have these statistics there, that 1 per 100,000 inhabitants, for example, Pakistan has only 0.07 cases of skin cancer. Or Thailand, 0.39, a little higher in South Africa. In Denmark, 12, and Australia has the highest proportion. Now, Australia is also a warm country, but do you know what else is extremely interesting? In Australia, every dermatologist and all the doctors prescribe sunblock. And every sunblock also blocks the conversion from vitamin D to the active form. Or maybe that's not so correct. It actually blocks the formation and activity of vitamin D on the skin. So the whole process that the body can do through the ultraviolet light to bring the inactive form to the active form by itself doesn't take place. And there is a causal relationship between the use of sunblock and the development of melanoma. They also looked at statistics. For example, 100 years ago, people all worked outside. There were gardeners, there were construction workers, there were carters, there were roofers, there were postmen. Today, 1/10 of the workforce works outside. And in 1912, Sweden had no people with melanoma at all. And today, in 100,000 people, they have some 11. Sweden has a statistic of 11 to 15 patients. Perhaps that is definitely not the mass, and yet melanoma must be taken seriously today. But we have to deal with the causes. And if you go deeper into all of the scientific literature, then you will find completely different statistics as well, who deny this statement very clearly, that the sun is not to blame, if we can speak of blame at all. I was just a little worried as a patient with a bacilloma who had a surgery almost mummified herself and uses a sun protection factor of 60 on the face every day in summer. You can protect yourself from the sun in the sense of direct irradiation over midday in the summer. But you can do that by simply sitting in the shade. That would be the most natural sun protection, and that you can also enjoy the sun at other times of the day, in the morning or in the afternoon. And then please, in a way, where the sun exposure is of course not only on the face, but also on your arms and legs, or if possible also on the body. That is the breast protection. I also observed that when children are at the beach, the first thing their mothers do, they put a sunscreen with a high protection factor. That is not good either. Children can also get some sun. And children benefit tremendously of high and good vitamin D activity in all processes of their development. And when you go to the beach with your children, it has been a given for every mother for decades that children wear a hat. Children no longer wear hats on the beach with a small peak in front that gives shade to the face. It's always windy on the beach. A large part of the body that heat leaves via the head. You protect children from the wind and maybe a little from too much sun. And if you have the feeling that the children should be protected a little too, then you put on a little blouse or a t-shirt that may cover most of the skin as well. But you don't put sunscreen with a high sun protection factor. And if you put it, take a sun protection factor that is very low, because it always represents a time. If I use 8, I can stay in the sun for 8 hours. If I take 60, 60. But please, who is doing that anyway? You always only stay for hours during the day. Then you might as well take a lower sun protection factor. And I would ask you to read more about a high quality sun protection factor that you can use on your children. That was my recommendation for the connection, the sun. We have to protect ourselves from the sun. We live here in Central Europe and we really actually need to thank the sun, able to use every ray of the sun. Because life may not allow sufficient sun exposure. Optimal, good, and not too much. But use what we are allowed to have. And with this in mind, I wish you all a wonderful evening. And I'm already looking forward to next week. Goodbye.